Hey there. So we are down at Gage Park in beautiful Hamilton. We're going to take you for a walk about the landscape here. It's a very interesting park. We might even try and sneak our way into the greenhouses a little bit later. But this is a real study in designing a landscape. And because it is such an old park, I believe it was originally built in 1927, there's a lot of great examples of young trees, like this nifty thing here, which is a Suicidophyllum japonicum. Suicidophyllum is Japanese katsura tree, and a very nifty plant. Oddly enough, when this plant drops its leaves in the fall, it smells like cotton candy. Why, Mother Nature? And then there's some massive older trees scattered throughout the landscape that we're going to take a look at, and some of them are very interesting, and some of them are only moderately interesting, which I guess is pretty good. So as we cut across here, it's interesting to note how everything's been growing all winter long. Even under the snow, the grass has been growing. Nature doesn't stop just because it's too cold for us to be happy. And things are just starting to perk up now. This is the middle of March. For posterity's sake, we're also in the middle of the COVID-19 epidemic, which is interesting that more and more people are outside. Let's swing around here. There are many interesting trees here. This great big guy is a Kentucky coffee tree, and he has giant pods that have a jelly inside them that were very, very sweet, and actually not bad. I've had it, and it was fed upon by mastodons. Mastodons were what we call the vector for this tree. They would, oh, and I found a pod. They would eat these pods and take out this jelly that's on the inside, and then they'd process the seeds and carry them elsewhere and fertilize them as they went. And so, yeah, this is just a neat little adaptation that nature has. How daring am I feeling? I don't know if I'm feeling that daring today. But yeah, a very beautiful tree, fairly unusual, a Carolinian species. So we're at the north edge of its range here. And then we're going to swing around over here. One of my favorite common named trees. Some people call it hackberry, which I think is a terrible name. And one of my students recently told me that it's called a bastard elm, which I think is way better. This is hackberry, and hackberry has this beautiful corky bark. Great winter interest because of that. Other than this, the tree does absolutely nothing special, but it's bulletproof. So it's a great street tree. So it's a wonderful tree as an alternative to ash. It because it's in the elm family, it's tolerant of poor oxygenated soils and compacted soils, and clay soils and wet soils. And on top of that, there's a very special little butterfly called the snout butterfly that looks like it has a little nose that feeds on only this. So it even does that for the environment. So there's lessons here. Both of the trees that we've just looked at are super amazing plants for adding variety to the landscape, and variety equals resilience. The more different kinds of trees that we have in the landscape, and our street trees and so on, the more adaptable our trees are to adversity. So one of the interesting things about a park like this is the variety of trees that are here. And we have one of my least favorite trees, which is Norway maple. And Norway maple is an invasive species that doesn't live terribly long. But then we have this guy over here. This is a Dawn Redwood. And Dawn Redwoods were known only from fossils until 1941 or 42, when it was discovered in one valley in China. And this is a broadly tolerant tree. It's one of the fastest growing trees on the planet. It's related to actual redwoods. This one has had all the bark stripped off by squirrels, which is doubly interesting. And it develops this sort of musculature as it gets older. It's, again, broadly tolerant of clay soils and wet soils and so on. It is unusual in that it is a deciduous conifer. So it's a conifer that drops all its leaves in the wintertime. It turns apricot. And there's actually even a cone. Isn't that the coolest little cone ever? So only from fossils until 41 or 42. And it's very rare in the wild, but it's used in landscapes all over the world now, which is pretty funky. We're going to look a little later more about cones, because cones are a really easy way to identify one conifer from another. Conifer, cone-bearing plant. So this is a Scots pine. Scots pine is an invasive species. More and more we're trying to plant it less and less. And as we walk around here, just some of the beautiful trees that are here. This is the biggest basswood that I've ever seen. Basswood is a good carving wood. Basswood has edible leaves that are better for you than lettuce, but really taste about the same. But a really, really interesting plant. Right beside it is a beautiful sugar maple. Sugar maple's tough to recognize from the bark. It is variable in the extreme, and this one is particularly old. This is probably original to the park, so we're coming up on 100 years. And you look at the fissures and the texture in this bark. This is a great old tree. It's been damaged here, but it's healing very well. This is actually noteworthy. Really, really good scar tissue. So that's bare wood. And whatever wounded it forever ago, it has been healing this, and that's really good scar tissue. So as we swing around here, we're going to see a white pine, Pinus strobus. Strobus means cone. All pines are Pinus. This is Ontario's provincial tree. We've already looked at a Scots pine and a black pine. And if we look here at the cones, I should put them in the right order. Scramble, scramble, scramble. So this is Pinus sylvestris. It's often got a little hook to it, very geometric, sort of little pyramids. This guy is much larger. This is black pine, Pinus nigra. Nigra means black, so that one's nice and easy. And this, very, very different, is white pine, Pinus strobus. So 3 very different cones and 3 very different plants, but it's really easy to tell conifers apart by the cones. We've got Pinus sylvestris, Pinus nigra, and Pinus strobus, which is Scots pine, black pine, and white pine. So these plants here are junipers, and I think that these are magnificent specimens. They've got great form, they've got great winter interest, they're good for the birds. The thing about them is that we're not patient enough when we design our landscapes. These are perfect trees for small yards, but we want to be designing such that in 50 years they're fantastic. Not that they're fantastic today. We need to be designing for tomorrow in mind. Now we're going to walk over to a really neat feature, which is a rainwater lake. So this entire neighborhood is designed to drain into what was a duck pond and an actual little man-made lake, and now is this area that can fill up when it's raining and then go back down to being empty and dry when it isn't. And they've planted it all up with native species and really cool plants like sparkleberry. We're going to see a couple of other things while we're down here, and there's another really interesting part that we're going to see a little later on. We're going to talk about base flow. But if we spin around, we can look, and we're just going to go past the puddle here. But this is a permeable pavement so that they can drive down here and get onto the ground level and clean out these inlets if they need to, but a nice solid surface to drive on. I love the fact that they've planted it up with shrubs that are good for biodiversity, shrubs like serviceberry and sparkleberry and native spireas, which is super cool. They've put a lot of grasses in here as well. And if we look way down there, we will see that pale brown, those are all cattails. And my favorite aspect of rain gardening, my favorite concept in rain gardening is base flow. So when rain falls on the ground, roughly a third of it runs off into the creeks and rivers, roughly a third of it evaporates away, and roughly a third of it soaks into the ground. Of that third that soaks into the ground, some of it goes down and recharges our well water, but some of it goes down till it hits a layer of more or less permeable soil and goes sideways, and it will come out near where the creeks are. And when I was a little kid, I was asked my mom, Mom, how do the creeks stay running when it hasn't rained in a while? And my mom didn't know, and now we know that it's base flow. It's that water that goes down and then sideways and seeps out into the creek. So it's not at the bottom of the creek that we're seeing this. We're seeing that water seeping out about 2 feet up into the levels down into this rainwater lake, which is really kind of cool. And also, there's an extra lesson here that it's beautiful. This is going to be gorgeous in the summertime. Yeah, it takes a little more work to see it at this time of year, but it's going to be really, really lovely. And if we pan to the left and up, we're going to see black walnut trees. And black walnut trees are interesting because they were thought to be killing the plants around them because they release a chemical called juglone. And juglone is interesting in that it does kill the plants around it, but that chemical never gets out into the garden. So it's turning out to be a myth that that walnuts, juglones, kill the plants around them. It's turning out that if you just make sure that the garden is well watered and well fertilized, then, you know, with organic matter, then you're going to have a nice, happy, healthy garden. And also that serves to support Luna moths, which is super cool. So this is one of my favorite plants. In fact, these are several of my favorite plants. These are sparkleberry or winterberry. This is a native deciduous holly, Alex verticillata, and you need boys and girls to get berries. The boys only have male flowers and the girls only have female flowers and therefore berries. And this is a plant that is great for rain gardens. It stands spring flooding and summer drought. It does nothing all year long until winter gets here, and then it's spectacular. And in a climate where winter lasts a bloody long time, we want to have as much beauty as we can. And this is a really lovely plant. It's also interesting, a good lesson in the dangers of common names. I have had fights with people about whether it's called winterberry or sparkleberry. Now, my mind is sparkleberry is just a way cooler name, and winterberry is boring, but really a lovely, lovely plant.